Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. In the Harry Potter films, only two House-Elves appear on screen, Dobby and Kreacher. But beyond the camera lies a much deeper and darker tale of these magical beings. In J.K. Rowling's books, House-Elves are not just background creatures. They are part of a social system where freedom, servitude, loyalty and betrayal intertwine in the most unexpected ways. Sadly, much of this was left out of the films. And today, we're going to correct that injustice. Get ready to discover what crucial details about House-Elves were cut from the movies and which surprising facts you may have missed entirely. Enjoy watching. Number 1. The kitchen and the secret behind the feasts. If you ever wondered who cooks all those magnificent feasts in Hogwarts' Great Hall, the answer might shock you. No, food doesn't appear with a flick of a wand. It's prepared by House-Elves who work tirelessly in a vast kitchen right beneath the hall. This is revealed in The Goblet of Fire. When Harry and Ron first visit the kitchen, they're thrilled. The elves shower them with treats and hospitality. But Hermione is shaken as she sees slaves who don't even realize they're enslaved. For House-Elves, their service is a sacred duty and they can't imagine life without a master. Number 2. The Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. It was after this kitchen visit that Hermione decided to act. She founded an organization with a loud name, SPEW, to protect the rights of House-Elves. Her mission, to free as many elves as possible, even if it meant doing it against their will. She hid socks in the dormitory laundry, hoping a house-elf might find one and be set free. But the result was the opposite. The elves were offended. They avoided any area where Hermione might have left a freedom trap, and Ron and Harry suffered from a lack of pies and puddings. Number 3. Winky and the Shame of the Quidditch World Cup. The film version of The Goblet of Fire cut out the entire Winky storyline, even though it explained a great deal. Winky was a house elf who served Barty Crouch Sr. with fanatical loyalty. But after the Dark Mark incident, she was dismissed, even though the true culprit was Crouch's hidden son. Barty Crouch Jr. Winky was devastated by her dismissal. For a house elf, freedom isn't a reward, it's a disgrace. Dobby and Dumbledore helped her find work at Hogwarts, but she was never the same. She grieved, drank butterbeer, and lived in memories of the past. Number 4. Dobby and the Room of Requirement. If you thought Neville discovered the Room of Requirement, you've only seen the movie. In the book, it was Dobby who revealed this crucial part of the story. He told Harry about a mysterious room that changes based on the Seeker's needs. It was Dobby who warned Harry that Umbridge was close to discovering their secret group. It was Dobby who showed them where to hide. His help was once again vital. Yet the film gave this honor to another character, robbing Dobby of his moment. Number 5. Gillyweed and the Triwizard Tournament. In the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, Harry needs to stay underwater for an hour. In the film, Neville gives him Gillyweed, a magical plant that lets him breathe underwater. But the book tells a different story. It was Dobby who stole the Gillyweed. He overheard Professor McGonagall discussing the task and, without hesitation, stole the plant to help Harry. Dobby risked punishment and broke the rules, but none of that mattered to him. Protecting Harry was everything. Number 6. Kreacher and the Fatal Lie. One of the most tragic moments comes in The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry has a vision and tries to contact Sirius. Kreacher lies, saying Sirius isn't home. Harry rushes to the Ministry of Magic, and in doing so leads his godfather to death. Kreacher betrayed them because he loathed Harry and Sirius. His loyalty lay with Bellatrix and Narcissa. He even injured Buckbeak on purpose to ensure Sirius would leave the house. That small detail cost the life of one of the saga's most beloved characters. Number 7. Kreacher on Privet Drive. The film skipped one amusing yet important episode, Dumbledore and Kreacher's visit to the Dursleys. Dumbledore arrives to collect Harry and brings Kreacher to confirm whether Harry is now master of number 12 Grimmauld Place. Naturally, the Dursleys are horrified, and the moment where Dumbledore gives them the scolding they so richly deserve is one of the strongest scenes in the books. "You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands." Kreacher, of course, grumbled the entire time, but obeyed when Harry ordered him to be quiet. Number 8. Dobby's strange fashion sense. Dobby didn't just wear clothes, he celebrated them. When Harry saw him again in Goblet of Fire, the little elf was beaming, wrapped in layers of mismatched fabric. "Dobby is wearing a tea cosy for a hat, sir," he chirped proudly. Around his neck, several ties knotted over each other. His feet, a different sock on each. One had broomsticks, the other had stars. Every piece had meaning. Every piece was proof he was free. Hermione, with her usual determination, had started leaving knitted hats and socks hidden in Gryffindor Tower. Her goal was simple, to trick the House-Elves into picking them up and setting themselves free, but they refused to go near the place. "The other elves find it insulting," Dobby explained. "They thought freedom was shameful, dangerous, but not Dobby. He collected every item and wore them all, layer over layer, like medals. It didn't matter if they matched, it mattered that they were his." The other elves whispered. They thought he was strange. They laughed at his scarves and his tea cosies. But Dobby never cared. He didn't need anyone's approval. He had his socks, his dignity, and a heart full of joy. In the films his clothes were simple, but in the books his fashion was his flag, a patchwork of freedom, and no one wore it like Dobby. Number 9. The Battle of Hogwarts and the House-Elves. Kreacher stood at the front of the Hogwarts kitchens, eyes blazing, holding a cast-iron frying pan like a weapon. Behind him, dozens of House-Elves gripped knives, ladles, rolling pins, anything they could carry. They weren't soldiers, they weren't trained, but they had something stronger: loyalty. "Fight! Fight! For my master, Regulus!" Kreacher shouted, his voice echoing through the corridors. And they did. Charging into the battle with fearless determination, the smallest creatures in the castle became its fiercest protectors. The book paints the moment with heart. The elves didn't fight for glory or orders. They fought for the home they had served quietly for centuries. They fought for Dumbledore, for Harry, for freedom. It was Kreacher, once bitter and broken, who led the charge. The same elf who once spat at Hermione and cursed Muggleborns now rose as a symbol of courage. It was redemption, and it was powerful, but the films left it out. No battle cry, no army of elves, no Kreacher swinging his pan in the name of Regulus Black. Viewers never saw the kitchens empty as the elves ran to the front lines. They never heard the voice of the forgotten rise above the clash of wands, and that silence robbed Kreacher of his most heroic moment, one that proved he was more than a servant. He was a fighter. Number 10. Regulus Black and Kreacher's sacrifice. Kreacher remembered every word. Regulus Arcturus Black, once loyal to Voldemort, had changed his mind. He discovered the truth about Horcruxes. He knew what the Dark Lord had done, and he gave Kreacher an order. "Take this locket and go," he said. "Return home." Regulus never left the cave. He drank the poison himself, knowing what would follow. His body was swallowed by the dark waters. Kreacher escaped, only because he was ordered to. For years Kreacher kept the secret. No one asked, no one cared. He polished the locket, cried in silence, and muttered Regulus's name through rotting teeth. The other Blacks called him mad. Sirius called him worthless, but Regulus had trusted him with something sacred. When Harry finally listened, truly listened, Kreacher opened up. He showed them the truth. "Master Regulus was a brave man," he said. His voice broke. That moment shifted everything. Kreacher's heart, cracked and bitter, finally softened. He made soup for Harry. He cleaned without complaint. He fought in the Battle of Hogwarts with fury and pride, not for glory, for Regulus, for Harry, for redemption. The films gave us a twisted, snarling elf, but the books gave us a loyal servant with a broken heart and a memory that never faded. His pain was invisible, but it shaped the war in ways no one saw coming. Number 11, Dobby's job hunt. Dobby wanted to earn his freedom the honest way, not by hiding, not by begging, by working. After Lucius Malfoy threw him out, the little elf set off to find a job, but no one would hire him. Wizards didn't pay house-elves. The idea itself made them uncomfortable. House-elves don't get wages, was the common reaction. When Hermione suggested he demand payment and days off, Dobby nearly fainted. It went against everything he was raised to believe. But he didn't give up. He went from door to door asking for work. Most turned him away, some laughed in his face. Only one wizard said yes, Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster welcomed Dobby into Hogwarts and offered him 10 galleons a week and weekends off. Dobby, overwhelmed, negotiated it down to 1 galleon and 1 day off a month. That was more than enough for him. Dobby is a free elf, and Dobby is getting paid, he beamed. Dobby threw himself into his duties with a joy that seemed strange to others. He cleaned, cooked, and ironed with a proud smile. He wore all his clothes at once, socks, hats, scarves, as if to remind the world that he had chosen this life. It wasn't service forced by bonds, it was work he wanted. That choice made all the difference. It gave him dignity. And even the other elves who whispered behind his back couldn't take that away from him. The films gave us glimpses of his freedom, but they never showed the hard road that followed. They didn't show him knocking on doors, being rejected, or joyfully accepting what others would call crumbs. They skipped the part where Dobby redefined what it meant to be free, not by leaving service, but by choosing it on his own terms. Number 12. The wand ban. Winky was terrified. She stood frozen at the Quidditch World Cup, clutching Harry's wand, completely out of place, trembling, humiliated. House-elves weren't supposed to hold wands, not even touch them. "Winky is not doing it, sir. Winky is not doing it," she sobbed. But that didn't matter. The wand had been used to conjure the dark mark, and she was blamed. Bartholomew Crouch Sr., her master, dismissed her on the spot. No defense, no mercy, just disgrace. The law was unwritten but powerful. House-elves were born into service and kept there by tradition and fear. Winky's shame wasn't just about the spell, it was about being seen with a wand. That alone was taboo. In Goblet of Fire, even Hermione didn't fully grasp the depth of this injustice at first. "They've got powerful magic of their own," she said, but the Ministry never acknowledged it. Elves performed magic without wands, teleporting inside Hogwarts, levitating objects, even overpowering wizards. Yet they were denied access to the very tools that symbolized freedom in the magical world. Dobby, once free, still never asked for a wand. It wasn't pride, it was conditioning. The entire structure of wizarding society depended on this silent agreement that some creatures would remain powerful but powerless. As long as elves stayed wandless, they remained controllable. If that line had ever been crossed, if even one elf had been allowed a wand by law, the balance might have shattered. Wizards knew that. So did the elves. The films skipped that tension. Winky was erased. The fear, the injustice, the raw emotion, it vanished with her. But the books let us see the uncomfortable truth. The wizarding world wasn't just unfair by accident, it was built that way. And characters like Winky showed us what happened when someone tried to step across the invisible line. Not with defiance, but with a wand she never even meant to use. Number 13. The death of Dobby and his legacy. Dobby died with Harry Potter's name on his lips. Buried on the beach behind Shell Cottage, he was laid to rest under a simple headstone that read, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." But the books showed more than a grave. They showed Harry on his knees digging into the cold earth with his bare hands. No spells, no shortcuts, just raw effort. Ron and Dean offered to help, but Harry shook his head. And this wasn't about labor, it was about love. He had never done anything like this before, the book said, never dug a grave. That moment changed Harry. Up until then he had seen too much death, too much war. But digging Dobby's grave wasn't about strategy or survival, it was about choosing to care. It marked the moment he began to understand sacrifice not as a weapon, but as a promise. For the first time, Harry slowed down. He honored someone small, someone the world overlooked. It wasn't a wizard, it wasn't a soldier, it was a house elf who once ironed his hands for disobedience. Dobby's death also stirred something in Hermione. Her passion for house elf rights had once been a joke to Ron and Harry, but after the war her voice gained weight. She fought for their pay, their safety, and their dignity. She revisited SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, with a new resolve. The ministry, finally shaken by the war and what it revealed, began listening. Slowly, the laws started to shift. House elves were no longer just silent figures in the kitchens. They had names and stories. The films never showed that aftermath. They gave us the grave, the tears, and the farewell, but not the legacy. They missed the quiet revolution Dobby sparked. His freedom wasn't just a personal victory, it was a seed, one that Hermione and others like her refused to let die. In the books, Dobby's life ended on that beach, but his courage kept walking through the pages long after. Number 14, How Dobby Spied on the Malfoys. Dobby didn't forget who once owned him. After gaining his freedom, he still kept a close eye on the Malfoy family. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, it was Dobby who followed Draco Malfoy for weeks under Harry's orders. Not alone, though. Kreacher, the bitter and resentful elf of the Black family, was forced to join him. The two couldn't stand each other. Dobby believed in freedom and dignity. Kreacher clung to old blood traditions and called Dobby a disgrace, but they worked together reluctantly. The mission was simple. Find out what Draco was hiding. Hogwarts was full of whispers. Draco vanished for long stretches. His classmates noticed the change. Dobby saw him slip in and out of the room of requirement. He brought this detail straight to Harry. That one clue unravelled a much larger truth. Draco was using the room to repair the vanishing cabinet, a crucial part of Voldemort's plan to invade the school. Their investigation was more than surveillance. It was a clashing of values. Dobby remained cheerful, even as Kreacher muttered insults behind his back. "Kreacher will not work with that disgraceful free elf," he hissed, but Dobby ignored him. "Dobby is proud to be free," he snapped. Their dynamic added unexpected humor and tension, the kind that would have brought richness to the film. It's one thing to show dark secrets. It's another to let viewers watch them through the eyes of those who are often ignored. This subplot, entirely absent from the movie, revealed not just Draco's secret, but also the growing wisdom of Harry. He didn't just rely on Ron and Hermione anymore. He used every ally, even the smallest ones. In the end, it was Dobby's loyal watching that pointed Harry to the truth. A house elf, invisible to most, became the key to uncovering a Death Eater's mission. Number 15, The Hidden Magic of House-Elves. In Order of the Phoenix, number 12. Grimmauld Place was a fortress of spells, a location buried deep in layers of enchantments cast by the most powerful wizards alive, including Albus Dumbledore himself. It was unplottable, cloaked in the Fidelius charm, and further guarded by defensive hexes too complex for most to comprehend. And yet, within those walls, Kreacher, the ancient house elf, bound to the noble and most ancient House of Black, could slip in and out at will. His presence defied logic, breaking through magical barriers designed to resist even the Dark Lord. This detail, buried in the text and entirely absent from the film adaptations, reveals a haunting truth. House elf magic operates on a level wizards neither control nor fully understand. Kreacher's ability to apparate into Grimmauld Place even when it was the secret headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, signals something both chilling and awe-inspiring. Harry Potter himself is shocked when he realizes Kreacher had betrayed them to Narcissa Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange. The protective enchantments had failed, or rather they had never applied to him in the first place. Wizards, so proud of their wand-based traditions, had forgotten that other magics, older and deeper, flowed through the world. House-Elf magic is one of them. It has no incantations, no Latin, no wands. It is instinctual, ancient, and perhaps bound to emotions more than intellect. When Dobby is freed at the end of Chamber of Secrets, the most striking moment isn't his emancipation, but what comes seconds later. Standing in the grand hallway of Malfoy Manor with the icy aristocrat Lucius Malfoy looming above him, Dobby doesn't run or cower. He lifts a single hand and snaps his fingers. Lucius is thrown backwards, crashing to the ground, disarmed, stunned. A wizard of status and power reduced to nothing by a being he once considered property. "You shall not harm Harry Potter," Dobby declares in the book, and with that he performs a feat of magic without wand, without warning, without resistance. It was clean, brutal, and final. What makes this scene all the more unsettling is how the films softened it. Dobby snaps his fingers, yes, but the force, the magnitude of what he does, physically overpowering a Malfoy, is understated. There's no real fear, no acknowledgement of the imbalance this act reveals. The movies chose charm over threat, but in the books Dobby is a being capable of violence, of warlike magic. When provoked by love or loyalty, he is not just endearing, he is powerful. In Deathly Hallows, Dobby performs an act that no wizard could accomplish. At Malfoy Manor, surrounded by Death Eaters with anti-apparition jinxes buzzing in the air like electrical storms, he arrives, uninvited, untraceable, and whisks Harry and his friends away. Not even Voldemort himself could apparate into that manor. The enchantments were layered thick by Death Eaters and protected by the Malfoy family's dark magic heritage. Yet Dobby arrives, undetected, and leaves with Luna, Dean, Mr. Ollivander, and eventually Harry and Griphook. All this without a wand, without a chant, just his will, his desperation, his belief in Harry Potter. He did it through something no spellbook ever taught. And again, the films erase the tension. Dobby appears like a miracle, yes, but the raw defiance of magical law is never explored. Viewers don't question how he does it, but readers? They pause. They remember that even Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, struggles with understanding House-Elf magic. In Goblet of Fire, she observes Winky, distraught and intoxicated, perform spells that defy basic magical principles. It's one of the few times Hermione is completely speechless, because she doesn't know how it works. Albus Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, never dismisses elf magic. He respects it, even fears it. In Half-Blood Prince, he acknowledges the limitations of wizard enchantments. He never says it aloud, but his actions betray a knowledge that wizardkind is not the apex of magical evolution. There are forces that bend rules, rewrite logic, and don't fit into the rigid structures of magical education at Hogwarts. Elves, centaurs, goblins, they all tap into different currents. And of them, elves are perhaps the most enigmatic because they are bound to wizarding families by ancient oaths that go beyond contracts or spells. Kreacher's betrayal and later redemption are not just plot devices, they are commentary on how deeply magic is woven into servitude. When Sirius mistreats Kreacher, the elf is driven to destroy him, but when Harry offers him kindness, not just commands but dignity, Kreacher becomes loyal beyond measure. His magic strengthens with his will. In Deathly Hallows, Kreacher leads the kitchen revolt at Hogwarts, rallying the elves to defend the castle. He fights, he takes up arms, and no one can stop him. That battle at Hogwarts was filled with wizard duels, curses, and giants. But behind the Great Hall's walls, it was the House-Elves who surged into battle, wielding kitchen knives and pouring raw, emotional magic into the fight. Fight! Fight for my master, defender of House-Elves! Fight the Dark Lord! In the name of brave Regulus, fight! Kreacher shouts. It's a war cry, not a whisper. It's ancient vengeance given voice, and it is terrifying. What's most unsettling is that the wizarding world ignores this. Not because they don't see it, but because they choose not to. They fear what they do not control. Elves are left uneducated, untrained in formal magic, precisely because no one wants to see what they could do if taught. Imagine a house elf studying at Hogwarts. Imagine one learning structured transfiguration, charms, arithmancy. Their raw magical power, already beyond wizard capacity, could reshape the hierarchy of the magical world, and so the books show us glimpses, carefully veiled, of magic that cannot be categorized. Number 16. Drunk Winky. Winky's fall from grace begins not with a betrayal or an act of cruelty, but with the simple breaking of a rule. During the Quidditch World Cup, she is found holding a wand, not just any wand, but Harry Potter's own, while chaos unfolds around the dark mark in the sky. Barty Crouch Sr., her master, wastes no time. The dismissal is swift and final, and though Winky is technically free, what follows is not liberation, but descent. She doesn't flee into the night or embrace the unknown with wide eyes. Instead, she collapses into a grief so raw it barely resembles anything magical. It is deeply human in its tragedy, because what Winky wants most is not freedom, but purpose. And once it's ripped away, she turns to the only thing that dulls the pain: butterbeer. To the uninitiated, butterbeer sounds harmless. A cozy drink beloved by Hogwarts students, warm in the winter and pleasantly fizzy when chilled. But what the books quietly reveal, and what the films omit entirely, is that for house elves, butterbeer is not just a mild treat. It is intoxicating. As Hermione Granger herself observes, it's not strong for humans, but it's very strong for house elves. And so Winky, shamed and untethered, finds herself curled in the Hogwarts kitchens, intoxicated, weeping, clinging to a life that no longer wants her. Her eyes are perpetually red and puffy. Her voice, when it emerges, is slurred and self-pitying. She reeks of butterbeer, not in jest, not as a comic side note, but as a symbol of profound personal collapse. The contrast between Winky and Dobby is where J.K. Rowling's genius for emotional complexity quietly shines. Dobby, once freed by Lucius Malfoy, revels in his new independence. He finds employment at Hogwarts, proudly accepts wages, chooses his own clothes. He is, in many ways, the poster child for elf liberation, but Winky stands as his tragic mirror. She does not want clothes, she does not want wages. She wants her place back in a rigid system where belonging means servitude. Her freedom feels like abandonment, and this perhaps is why her story was never adapted for the screen. It is too messy, too grey, too real. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Winky's decline is not fleeting. It spans chapters. Again and again she is found slumped in the corner of the kitchen, butterbeer bottles nearby, whispering about Master Barty and the shame she cannot wash away. Winky is not a bad elf. Winky didn't mean to do it. Winky was following orders. She sobs. She cannot comprehend that the system has failed her. In her eyes, she has failed it. The emotional core of her tragedy is this inversion. Her heartbreak stems from being set free. It is not cruelty she condemns, but the loss of control that her former master wielded over her life. What makes Winky's arc particularly haunting is the way other characters respond to it. Dobby, ever optimistic, tries to help her. He brings her clothes, he encourages her to embrace her new independence, but even Dobby, in his innocence, cannot reach the depths of Winky's despair. She pushes him away, she mocks his socks, she sneers at his freedom, and Hermione, champion of house elf rights, founder of SPEW, watches in horror as her theories crumble against Winky's reality. Freedom, it turns out, is not a one-size-fits-all solution, especially not for a creature indoctrinated from birth into believing that worth comes from obedience. There is a quiet maturity in Winky's story, the kind of narrative complexity that is rarely granted to supporting characters, especially magical ones. In a series filled with dragons, curses, and heroic triumphs, her tale is grounded in something painfully human: addiction. She drinks to forget. She drinks because reality, in its new and unfamiliar shape, is unbearable. Rowling never glamorizes it. She does not use Winky as comic relief. The butterbeer-soaked elf is treated with both sadness and seriousness, a rare combination in a genre often leaning on caricature. In Winky, we are given a portrait of grief that refuses to fit into neat boxes. Her addiction is not resolved with a spell. No one waves a wand and makes her better. There is no magical cure, no triumphant redemption arc. Winky's condition lingers. In Order of the Phoenix, she is still drinking, still crying, still hopeless. The wizarding world continues on, barely noticing her decline. And this is perhaps Rowling's most devastating commentary. The system that discarded her does not mourn her, it does not remember her. And in that silence, we are reminded how easily suffering becomes invisible. What might have been had the films included Winky? A generation of young viewers might have been introduced, through the gentle metaphor of fantasy, to the concept of trauma and the destructive ways it can manifest. They might have learned that not every character needs to be saved, that sometimes pain is not conquered, but endured. The exclusion of Winky's storyline, her dismissal, her grief, her alcoholism, is a quiet loss in the adaptation, a choice that left the films a little shinier, but a little less true. In a world where house-elves are so often depicted as either servile punchlines or symbols of noble rebellion, Winky is something else entirely. She is a casualty of reform, an inconvenient truth, and in that she is perhaps one of the most honest characters in the entire series. She doesn't change the world. She doesn't stand up to her oppressors. She mourns them. And by doing so, she forces us to reconsider the cost of change and the ways in which even well-meaning revolutions can leave some behind. Number 17. Christmas in the Kitchen. In the thick stone walls of Hogwarts, beneath the grand dining halls and echoing corridors, there lies a place most students rarely see, a kitchen lit not by chandeliers but by the soft orange glow of hearths and stoves, filled with the warm scents of cinnamon and firewood. This is where the heart of the castle beats in quiet rhythm, tended to by beings most of the wizarding world prefers not to think about. But Harry Potter, by his 5th year, knew this place well. It was the eve of Christmas, and as snow painted the grounds of the castle in white silence, Harry descended the stairs to the kitchen, not to satisfy hunger, but to find a different kind of comfort. The events of that year had weighed on him with an invisible gravity. The return of Voldemort, the whispers of doubt in the ministry, and the looming darkness made the lights of the castle feel dimmer. And yet in that unlikely place, surrounded by beings so often dismissed, Harry found a moment of peace. The scene, lost in the films and brushed aside by scriptwriters seeking more explosive drama, lived vividly in the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It was on this quiet Christmas that Harry, accompanied by Ron, Hermione, and a few other members of Dumbledore's army, chose to spend the holiday not under mistletoe in the common room or at a grand feast, but in the humble company of House-Elves. The kitchen was already transformed into a miniature wonderland. Wreaths made of holly and winter berries hung from the stone walls, enchanted candles floated low over rows of wooden tables, and on every surface stood trays of delicacies so masterfully prepared they might have humbled the great hall itself. The house-elves, though startled at first by the unexpected guests, were quick to throw themselves into joyful motion. They bustled with purpose, offering mince pies, hot cocoa, and roasted chestnuts, each movement infused with pride. Yet one elf stood out among them, his mismatched socks and wide eyes immediately pulling Harry's attention: Dobby. Dobby, whose freedom Harry had helped secure years earlier, had not forgotten the kindness, and in the truest fashion of a soul unburdened by pride, he had been preparing a gift. The moment was small, quiet even, but filled with a kind of warmth that no spell could replicate. With trembling hands, Dobby presented Harry a pair of socks, one green with a stitched broomstick, the other pink with golden stars. They were imperfect, the yarn a little loose in places, the colours clashing loudly, but they were perfect in what they symbolized. "Dobby is making them himself, sir," the book tells us, as a Christmas present for his most favourite Harry Potter. This scene, omitted entirely from the cinematic adaptation, was not just a lost moment of sentimentality. It was a pivotal turning point in how readers understood Dobby, not as a comic sidekick or a pitiful servant, but as a friend. The gift was more than wool, it was a stitch in the thread of loyalty and love that wove Harry's true family, not by blood, but by choice. In a series that often emphasizes courage and battle, this quiet moment served as a reminder that not all heroism wears armor, sometimes it knits socks. The omission of this moment in the films left a quiet gap in Dobby's arc. For many moviegoers, he remains the squeaky-voiced elf who appeared briefly in Chamber of Secrets, vanished, and returned only to die in Deathly Hallows. His journey, rich in the books where he seeks purpose, dignity, and connection, is barely hinted at on screen. But in that kitchen scene, Rowling gave Dobby a soul, not defined by servitude, but by choice. He chose to make something, to give something. He chose to be present on Christmas night, not as a servant, but as a companion. What makes the scene even more powerful is the way the other House-Elves respond. While many still feel distrust toward Hermione's SPEW efforts, they welcome Harry and his friends with growing warmth. They do not see themselves as victims, but as caretakers, and when treated with respect, they flourish. The feast they prepare isn't an act of duty, but of celebration. For once, the magic of Christmas wasn't in the snow or the spells, it was in recognition. For characters like Winky, who still struggled with shame after being dismissed by the Crouch family, that recognition meant more than sugar plums. Rowling's decision to place this scene in the heart of the kitchens speaks volumes about her understanding of comfort and dignity. In the hidden spaces of the castle, among pots and pans and the scent of treacle tart, she tells us that humanity exists even in the smallest beings, and for Harry, who had lost Sirius only months later, the gift of those socks might seem trivial to an outsider, but to him they were the kind of magic that no wand could ever reproduce. They were unconditional. In leaving out this moment, the filmmakers inadvertently weakened the emotional resonance of Dobby's death. For viewers who had never seen him give a gift or share a moment of peace, his sacrifice later on, when he dies rescuing Harry and the others from Malfoy Manor, felt abrupt. But for readers, his final words, "Such a beautiful place to be with friends. Dobby is happy to be with his friend Harry Potter," carried the echo of that Christmas night in the kitchen. He didn't just die for a master, he died for someone who had once accepted a pair of socks with tears in his eyes. It is worth noting that this was not the only kitchen scene omitted from the films, but it was perhaps the most human. In a series filled with duels and dragons, the choice to cut quieter moments reflects a broader tendency to prioritize spectacle over soul. But it is in these quieter chapters that Rowling grounded her world in something real. The elves did not need to wield wands to matter. Their presence, their hands shaping every meal at Hogwarts, their eyes watching from behind cupboard doors, was a heartbeat often ignored, until Harry chose to sit among them. Number 18, House-Elves and the Chamber of Secrets. When the walls of Hogwarts whispered of fear, and the air turned heavy with unspoken dread, it wasn't only the students who felt the change. In the second book of the Harry Potter series, the students began turning to stone one by one. A deep, ancient panic spread through the corridors of the castle. But beyond the students and teachers, there were other eyes watching, other hearts beating faster. Hidden from the daily bustle, nestled in the warmth of the kitchen hearth, the house-elves of Hogwarts began to tremble. Their unease, unlike that of the professors, wasn't born of confusion or helplessness. It was something older, instinctive, a resonance with the castle's own lifeblood. This was a truth J.K. Rowling touched upon in the books, but one the films left behind in the shadows. House-elves, often depicted in the series as loyal servants bound to wizards, possess magic older and wilder than most witches or wizards understand. They are not merely helpers, but deeply magical beings attuned to the energies of the places they inhabit. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, there is a small but striking moment when Professor McGonagall speaks of the terror growing within the school. However, it is only in the books that we see this fear reflected most vividly in the house-elves, who, as noted by Rowling, had begun whispering nervously among themselves, refusing to leave the kitchens. It's not just a background detail, it's a clue to something far more profound. The elves' behavior suggests an ancient connection between them and Hogwarts itself. They were not afraid in the ordinary sense, they were responding to something deep and magical, a shift in the castle's very soul. The Chamber of Secrets, built by Salazar Slytherin, was awakening. The creature within it, the basilisk, had begun its silent hunt. But the house-elves did not need a Parseltongue whisper to sense it. They felt it in the stones, in the pipes, in the old bones of the school. The films, choosing to centre solely on the adventures of Harry, Ron and Hermione, missed this eerie thread entirely. There is something deeply symbolic in the way house-elves reacted. Unlike the professors who puzzled over the attacks with logic and evidence, the elves relied on instinct. This is not just a magical difference, it is a spiritual one. House-elves belong to Hogwarts in a way that few humans ever could. Their presence beneath its floors, behind its walls, makes them part of the architecture of the school. They are bound not by chains but by roots, and when those roots shuddered, the elves knew something unspeakable was stirring. In a passage from the book, Rowling writes, there was an odd atmosphere in the school. The house-elves in the kitchens were terrified and kept themselves to themselves. It's a brief mention, easy to miss, but for readers who look deeper, it's clear that these creatures are not just cogs in the background, they are sensors of the castle's own anxiety. The elves' fear was not born from rumour, but from a magical intuition far beyond the reach of wands or incantations. It is as if they are the pulse of the castle, quickening when danger approaches. Dobby, the most well-known elf in the series, provides a vivid example of this attunement. Although not a Hogwarts elf at the time, his frantic attempts to warn Harry came not only from knowledge, but from sensitivity to the evil stirring within the school. Dobby knew of the Chamber of Secrets not because Lucius Malfoy told him, but because Dobby felt it. When he slammed his head against the wall and begged Harry to leave, he was expressing more than fear. He was channeling a kind of primordial dread that only house-elves could access. It's no coincidence that house-elves avoid speaking openly about what they know. In the book, they do not tell Dumbledore, they do not tell McGonagall. Instead, they withdraw into their underground sanctum and whisper to one another in quiet terror. This silence isn't cowardice, it's survival. The magic of the chamber, of the air of Slytherin, isn't just ancient, it's laced with the kind of power that runs deep in the oldest traditions of magic, the kind elves have been brushing against for centuries. The house-elves understood that the awakening of the basilisk was more than a school incident. It was a magical event rooted in the blood of the founders, a ritual echo too dangerous to name. In stark contrast, the films reduce this layered subplot to nothing. There are no hints of kitchen whispers, no sideways glances, no signs that the castle's unseen inhabitants are reacting to the threat. In doing so, the films strip the story of one of its most haunting elements, the idea that Hogwarts itself was quaking, not from the cries of petrified students, but from the stirrings of something buried in its foundations. The elves, in their silence, were the only ones who listened. It's important to understand that Hogwarts was never just a school. It was a living, breathing entity shaped by the will and dreams of its founders. The Chamber of Secrets was a scar left by one of them. And like any scar, it ached when danger approached. The elves, being closest to the castle's skin, were the first to feel it. They are the ones who clean its towers, scrub its walls, maintain its magical kitchens, and keep its ancient enchantments humming. When something dark stirs in the bones of Hogwarts, they are the first to know. Imagine the cold dread creeping through the stone floors as the basilisk slithered through pipes built centuries ago. The elves, moving quietly through the kitchens at night, must have felt a tremor, a ripple in the walls, a strange hum in the air. Perhaps they spoke in hushed tones about the return of the ancient terror, stories passed down among them for generations. Maybe some of them even remembered the last time it happened, when a girl named Myrtle was found dead in the bathroom. For humans, this was history. For elves, it was memory. The elvish fear becomes even more poignant when one considers that they have no protection. No wands, no defensive spells. Their magic is different, potent, yes, but not designed for war. They could not fight the basilisk. They could only hide. Their whispers weren't just gossip, they were their defense. And still they stayed. They did not flee. Unlike Filch or Peeves or even some students, the House-Elves never abandoned the castle. Their loyalty was absolute, even when the danger slithered beneath their feet. There's a kind of tragic heroism in that. The elves, so often depicted as subservient, demonstrated a quiet bravery that rivals any of the Gryffindors. They held the kitchens, kept the food flowing, kept the fires lit, all while knowing that a monster was stalking the halls. The students never saw them, the teachers didn't ask, but the elves endured, and in doing so, they preserved the heartbeat of Hogwarts through its darkest hour. Had the films included just a glimpse of this, the trembling elves in the kitchens, the flickering torches casting long shadows on their frightened faces, it would have deepened the narrative. It would have reminded the audience that magic isn't just spells and curses, it's atmosphere, it's memory, it's the invisible threads that tie a castle, a creature, and a people together. The House-Elves felt the evil before it had a name, and that makes them, in many ways, the true guardians of the school. In skipping over this, the films missed an opportunity to show Hogwarts not as a backdrop, but as a character, a place alive with voices unheard. The House-Elves' story, though quiet, carries the weight of centuries. They are the unseen witnesses, the unacknowledged sentinels of a castle built on secrets. When the chamber opened, they knew, and when it closed again, their silence was not one of ignorance, but of ancient understanding. Number 19. Harry's respect for Kreacher. After the death of Sirius Black, the ancient house at 12 Grimmauld Place became Harry Potter's property. With it came the legacy of the Black family, their dark heirlooms, and one particularly difficult creature, Kreacher, the old and bitter house-elf. The moment Harry inherited the house, he unknowingly inherited its loyal but resentful guardian. Unlike Dobby, who adored his freedom, Kreacher was chained not only by magic, but also by decades of mistreatment, neglect, and isolation. At first glance, he appeared as nothing more than a grumbling servant, but within the walls of the house, his bitterness held the potential to be far more dangerous. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Kreacher's loyalty to his previous masters and his hatred for Sirius foreshadowed the betrayal that would cost Sirius his life. And yet what followed in the next book revealed something entirely overlooked by the films, a quiet transformation of the elf that mirrored a profound transformation in Harry himself. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione began preparing for their dangerous mission in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the trio returned to 12 Grimmauld Place, the abandoned and gloomy headquarters of the Order. It was there that they once again encountered Kreacher. Still as frail and ill-tempered as ever, the elf hissed slurs under his breath and barely masked his disdain. In the absence of Sirius and the other members of the Black family, Kreacher was a relic of a past Harry detested. Yet something had changed in Harry since the last time they met. Dumbledore had taught him a lesson, not in spells or battle, but in empathy. He had advised Harry that kindness and respect, even when undeserved, had the power to transform even the most broken of beings. It was a small and simple idea, but its effects would soon ripple through the story in ways few readers expected. Harry didn't bark orders at Kreacher, though he had every magical and legal right to. He didn't punish the elf for past betrayals, even though they were grave. Instead, Harry chose to offer something rare: civility. He thanked Kreacher for his assistance. He addressed him not with contempt, but with gentleness. He asked, rather than demanded. The shift in tone was subtle, but to someone like Kreacher, who had spent his life under the tyranny of pure-blood cruelty, it was revolutionary. In Deathly Hallows, Kreacher is asked to track down Mundungus Fletcher, who had stolen valuables from the house, and, unknowingly, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Kreacher accepts the task, but not with reluctance or bitterness. He does it with a fire in his eyes, with purpose and loyalty Harry had never seen before. It was a turning point that unfolded quietly, with no dramatic music or flashing lights, but its impact was lasting. In Chapter 10 of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Kreacher returns from his mission. The change in him is striking. He is cleaner, his tone is sharper. He offers Harry food and drink and takes pride in preparing meals for the trio. This isn't servitude born from obligation, this is devotion born from dignity. The very same elf who once mumbled curses beneath his breath is now serving willingly, even eagerly. J.K. Rowling describes him. Kreacher bowed again low to the ground and said, "Master has given Kreacher an order, and Kreacher is glad to obey." That moment, often skimmed over by readers and completely omitted from the films, reveals something vital. Kreacher is not evil, he is not broken beyond repair. He is, like so many in the wizarding world, a product of how he has been treated. The movies, in their haste to push the narrative forward, left this subplot behind. They show Kreacher briefly, still muttering to himself, still bitter, but never offer any insight into his redemption. There is no room for the delicate dance of respect and forgiveness that Harry offers, and the powerful lesson it carries is lost. In a world obsessed with wand battles and prophecies, the quiet transformation of an old house elf doesn't seem cinematic enough. But it is precisely this transformation that showcases one of the most important evolutions in Harry's character. He, boy who once shouted at Kreacher in fury, had learned the value of compassion toward the oppressed. This wasn't just a change in tone, it was a shift in philosophy. The significance of Kreacher's loyalty becomes even clearer during the infiltration of the Ministry of Magic. As the trio navigates danger and deception, Kreacher protects their base. He keeps the house clean, makes meals, and most importantly, guards their secrets. Without him, their mission might have failed before it even began. His commitment to Harry becomes an unspoken but powerful thread running through their time at Grimmauld Place. Harry, in turn, never reverts to cruelty. He does not abuse the elf's trust. This mutual respect becomes a rare and beautiful bond in a world often divided by blood status, power, prejudice. It's a little-known fact among casual fans that this entire relationship shift was inspired by a deep understanding of what Dumbledore had hinted at throughout the series. Love, respect, and empathy are more powerful than magic. Dumbledore once told Harry, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." That idea takes shape not only in grand battles or tearful reunions, but in quiet choices, like thanking a house elf or offering him soup without being asked. Kreacher's redemption is not only his own, it's Harry's too. It shows that the boy who lived under the stairs has grown into someone who sees dignity in everyone, not just those with wands and robes. The films may have included Dobby's tragic death and his touching farewell, but they entirely neglected Kreacher's parallel arc. While Dobby represented freedom, Kreacher represented healing. He was not a symbol of rebellion, but of reconciliation. His story teaches that even the bitterest of hearts can be softened with kindness, and that wounds inflicted by decades of cruelty can begin to mend through the smallest acts of grace. It's not just a story about an elf. It's a lesson about how we choose to treat those beneath us, socially, economically, or magically. Kreacher's behavior is not suddenly perfect. He remains sharp-tongued and rough around the edges. But he is no longer dangerous. He is no longer filled with hatred. He becomes, in his own way, heroic. It is Kreacher who leads the charge of the House-Elves during the Battle of Hogwarts, screaming, "Fight, fight, fight for my master, defender of House-Elves, fight the Dark Lord, in the name of brave Regulus, fight!" That line, missing from the films, echoes with power. In that moment, the arc is complete. Kreacher, the elf once enslaved by blood purity doctrine, now defends a half-blood boy who dared to show him kindness. In many ways, this shift is more powerful than a duel. It illustrates how deep-rooted pain and trauma can be undone, not through force, but through consistent acts of respect. Harry's choice to show Kreacher dignity is an act of rebellion not just against Voldemort, but against the assumptions of his own world. It's a rejection of the idea that House-Elves exist to serve, that they cannot think or feel deeply, or that their value is tied to obedience. Harry's behavior proves otherwise. The wizarding world is filled with tales of heroism, but few are as subtle as this one. Harry did not win Kreacher with magic. He won him with humanity. That lesson, buried in a few quiet chapters, is one of the most profound messages J.K. Rowling wove into her books. It is a pity that the films, constrained by time or perhaps commercial vision, saw fit to erase it. Without this subplot, viewers miss out on a critical turning point in Harry's development. They miss the example of how to lead not with power, but with principle. In hindsight, Kreacher's arc is not just about an elf serving a master better than the last. It is about how people, when treated with empathy, can rise beyond what anyone expected. It is about the magic of decency, a kind of magic that doesn't require spells. The quiet respect Harry offers Kreacher changes everything, not just for the elf, but for the mission, the war, and for Harry himself. It is a magic more enduring than the Elder Wand, and far more difficult to master. The true mark of Harry's growth is not found only in his final duel with Voldemort. It is found in how he speaks to the forgotten, the neglected, the despised. It is in how he redefines what it means to be a leader, not by dominating, but by listening. Kreacher's redemption is a mirror held up to every character in the series. It asks, silently, how different things could be if they had all treated him with such care. It leaves us wondering how many other creatures still walk the shadows of that magical world, waiting for someone to ask them, not command them. Number 20. The origins of House-Elves. In the shadowy corners of the magical world, beyond the grand halls of Hogwarts and the battle cries of wand-wielding heroes, lives a race so deeply woven into the fabric of wizarding society that they are almost invisible. The House-Elves, with their oversized eyes and shrunken limbs, are not just background servants or comic relief. Their story, when glimpsed beyond the surface, is one of ancient power, forced silence, and a forgotten legacy. The films, in their quest for spectacle, have largely ignored this hidden tragedy, barely scratching the surface of who the House-Elves truly are and where they came from. But the books, with subtle whispers and overlooked footnotes, offer a sliver of the truth, a truth that suggests House-Elves were not always servants. Once, long ago, they may have been something much more. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Dobby proudly tells Harry, "Dobby is a free elf." It is a moment of triumph met with cheer by readers who have followed his journey from fearful subjugation to self-liberation. But hidden beneath that victory is an unspoken question. How did House-Elves become slaves in the first place? Rowling never offers a clear origin, but hints suggest a haunting history. Their magic is described as powerful, capable of circumventing the rules that bind even the most skilled witches and wizards. Dobby can apparate within Hogwarts, a feat that Dumbledore himself claims is impossible for humans. Winky can perform binding spells without a wand. Kreacher can find his way into the heavily protected cave of Regulus Black's tragic end. Their abilities defy laws that the magical world holds sacred, and yet they serve in kitchens. The most telling clue comes in The Order of the Phoenix, when Dobby speaks of the ancient magic that binds him to a master. He cannot betray secrets. He punishes himself for speaking ill of his owners. This is not a spell placed upon them by wizards in recent centuries. It feels older, deeper, like a binding written into the bones of the world. Wizards didn't just charm house-elves into servitude, they rewrote their very nature. Or perhaps, more disturbingly, they harnessed a deeper kind of contract, one forged at a time when magic was raw and unwritten, sealed not with wands but with will and submission. The magical world is filled with ancient beings, goblins, giants, centaurs, all of whom retain varying degrees of independence, danger, and dignity. But only house-elves are shackled. Only they are bound by enchantments so complete they punish themselves for thoughts of rebellion. Why? Why them, and not the others? In the tales of Beedle the Bard there is not a single mention of house-elves. No cautionary fable, no heroic tale, no role in legend. It is as if they were erased. A deliberate omission. The magical world has a long history of altering memory for the sake of convenience. Just ask Gilderoy Lockhart. But to omit an entire race from recorded folklore suggests more than oversight. It suggests shame, suppression, fear. There are those who theorize that house-elves were once guardians of a purer form of magic, one not reliant on wands or incantations, but instinctive, emotional, and self-sustaining. Their abilities, unfiltered through formal education or rigid structure, seem to spring from deep within. Hermione, in her tireless activism, often insists that house-elves deserve rights, but even she fails to grasp the scale of what has been lost. She speaks of fair wages and working conditions, but perhaps the real tragedy is not how they live, but what they have forgotten. A people whose history has been severed from them cannot reclaim their identity simply through better treatment. They must recover memory, dignity, and power. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry returns to the home of the Black family, he finds Kreacher transformed, not by a gift, but by a story. He learns of Regulus, the master who gave his life to destroy a Horcrux, and who treated Kreacher with a rare sliver of compassion. For the first time, Kreacher acts not out of compulsion, but out of loyalty, not obligation, but choice. Master Regulus was a good boy. He is dead, Kreacher says, his voice trembling with grief. It is a moment that transcends servitude. It hints at something buried within, remnants of a culture that once chose its alliances, loved its leaders, and fought for its values. The films never show this transformation. They present Kreacher as sullen, bitter, a footnote in a larger drama. But in the book, he becomes a symbol of what house-elves could be if given the chance to remember. That transformation is not political, it is spiritual. It shows that even the deepest enchantments cannot erase soul. Something ancient stirs in Kreacher's memory, something that defies the centuries of oppression, a whisper of who he once was. There is a theory that the first house-elves were never called elves at all. That word, borrowed from Muggle folklore, was imposed by wizards who needed to categorize what they could not understand. In early magical texts, those too fragile or forbidden to be held in the Hogwarts library, there are references to hearth spirits and wandless kin, beings who lived in harmony with nature, who tended to flame and forest, who spoke to beasts and healed with songs. They did not serve, they watched, they warned, They wove magic through care, not combat. And when the great wizarding houses rose to power, they brought these spirits into their homes, not as guests, but as prisoners. Wands were a turning point. They allowed magic to be refined, weaponized, passed from master to student like property. The old ways, instinctual, emotional, bound to place and purpose, became obsolete. The House-Elves, who had never needed wands, suddenly found their magic seen as primitive, and then dangerous, and finally unworthy. Better to keep them hidden, locked away, taught to fear their own strength. Over time, the myths of their origins faded, their names were forgotten, all that remained were orders and punishments. And yet, their magic endures. When Dobby rescues Harry from Malfoy Manor, he does what no wizard could. He apparates in and out of a heavily warded estate. He deflects spells, he protects, and he dies. In death, he is buried not as a servant, but as a friend. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. Harry carves it himself. It is the most honest grave in the entire series, the only one marked not by lineage or victory, but by love and loss. It stands as a quiet monument to all the stories untold, the histories erased, the voices silenced. The tragedy of the House-Elves is not just in their chains, but in their disappearance from legend. If Beadle the Bard wrote moral tales for children, why none for the elves? If they have always served, why is their enslavement never discussed in the great halls of magical history? If they are lesser beings, why does their magic outstrip the most learned witches and wizards? The silence speaks louder than denial. It is the silence of guilt. Rowling does not say what came before the servitude. She leaves only echoes, but fiction lives in those gaps. In imagining who the House-Elves were, we begin to understand the cost of magical progress. Power, after all, demands sacrifice. In the wizarding world, that sacrifice has a name: Dobby, Winky, Kreacher, Hokey, dozens more who go unnamed. They polish the trophies of those who conquered them. They light the fires that warm the halls of their captors. They carry the weight of a forgotten war. The wizarding world prides itself on tradition, but tradition, unexamined, is just a prettier word for control. The House-Elves are tradition's victims. In their hands, magic does not sparkle. It binds, it breaks, it weeps. Perhaps if the films had lingered a little longer, listened a little closer, they would have shown this. But cinema demands action. It has little patience for mourning. And so the story of the House-Elves remains largely untold. Only the readers know. Those who pause at Dobby's grave. Those who hear the crack of apparition, not as comedy, but as protest. Those who wonder why a race so powerful must live in shame. The magic of the House-Elves may indeed be older, purer, and deeper than wizardkind ever dared to admit. But as long as their origin is hidden, their power remains a secret. And secrets, as we have learned, are the lifeblood of the magical world. Number 21. The Fear of Voldemort. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there is a moment so sharp in its quiet terror that it brands itself into the reader's memory. Harry says the name Voldemort, and within seconds he, Ron, and Hermione are ambushed by snatchers. It is not a coincidence. The books explain that a taboo, a dark enchantment, has been placed on the name. Any witch or wizard who dares to utter Voldemort reveals their location instantly. This enchantment is cunning because it targets the brave, those who resist the fear and refuse to use euphemisms like "he who must not be named." The spell filters out the defiant. And while this concept is compelling, the films brush past it without more than a passing nod. Yet what they erase along with the spell is an even more powerful layer, the deep-rooted, nearly instinctive fear that magical creatures like House-Elves feel toward Voldemort, a fear that is not just emotional, but historical. When Harry meets Dobby, the free elf can barely whisper the Dark Lord's name. In Chamber of Secrets, Dobby punishes himself every time he tries to say too much, but what startles most is his reaction when Harry says Voldemort. Dobby shakes, trembles, his eyes dart about like he expects to be struck by lightning. And even in Deathly Hallows, Dobby never outgrows that fear. This reaction is not comic relief. It is the mark of something deeper, a racial trauma engraved in House-Elves by centuries of abuse, obedience, and terror. Dobby's fear isn't just superstition, it's survival. The House-Elves have been enslaved for centuries, conditioned to avoid defiance, conditioned to please, and punished when they don't. In such a world, the fear of a figure like Voldemort becomes absolute. They do not need to be told to tremble, they know to. Their magic is different, older, more instinctive, but it recoils against the threat of the Dark Lord as if memory alone is enough to activate their caution. Voldemort represents a return to darkness, not only for wizards, but for magical creatures who already lived in the shadows. To them, he is not just a man, he is an echo of every master who ever beat them. What makes this detail so haunting is the quiet consistency with which Rowling threads it through the story. In Deathly Hallows, Kreacher too flinches when the name is said. He mutters it, barely forming the syllables. Though Kreacher has always been proud of his ties to pure-blood wizards and even supported Voldemort's ideology through the Black family, the fear is still there. It cuts across loyalty. It lingers in his bones. Fear of Voldemort is not political. It is animal. For House-Elves, the fear exists beneath allegiance. It is instinct, perhaps even magically enforced. The taboo spell Voldemort casts later in the final book is meant to weaponize bravery. It's a curse that punishes the few who still speak the truth. Most witches and wizards by that point have given up. They do not say the name, they say you know who or he who must not be named, thinking it safer, more polite. But Harry continues to speak it. Hermione does too, though reluctantly. Ron tries, but the name catches in his throat. The difference between those who say the name and those who avoid it defines the underground resistance. The brave are few, the terrified are many, but House-Elves, they are beyond even that divide. In one of the most chilling sequences, the trio is hiding in the woods. They use protective charms, they stay quiet. They don't know that Harry's insistence on saying Voldemort, that same stubbornness he's always had, is what will betray them. When he speaks the name, the enchantment activates. Instantly, their magical protections fall. The snatchers descend. It's a masterful moment that illustrates how bravery can be dangerous, how courage and recklessness can be the same thing. And yet that same mechanism wouldn't have worked on a house-elf. They can't say the name. This distinction matters because it exposes the deep chasm in magical society. Wizards like to pretend they are the rulers of their world, that their fears or politics matter most. But beneath them are the creatures they overlook, and those creatures carry centuries of history on their backs. The films erase this. They do not show how the taboo functions. They never explain that the spell only works on those who say the name. They certainly never show how creatures like Dobby react to Voldemort's name, but in the books this is clear. It's a quiet subplot of magical fear. What is even more moving is that Dobby, despite his fear, still acts. When he arrives at Malfoy Manor to save Harry and his friends, he is visibly terrified. Bellatrix Lestrange mocks him for daring to defy his betters. She screams, "You dirty little creature, how dare you take a wand? How dare you defy your masters?" Dobby doesn't answer with courage, he answers with action, and though he trembles, he disarms Bellatrix. Though he shakes, he rescues Harry. Though he is mortally wounded, he dies saying, Dobby is happy to be with his friend Harry Potter. The fear never leaves him. He acts anyway, and that's what makes him a hero. That's also what makes the fear meaningful. If House-Elves were simply brave, then their actions would be expected, but because they act despite fear, their bravery matters more. The trauma they carry is not symbolic. It is embedded in the way their bodies react. When Kreacher is ordered to speak of his past, he resists. His magic rebels, his voice cracks. There is a moment when he looks cornered, not because of physical force, but because of ancient rules bound in blood and history. He's not just afraid, he is chained. This context gives Voldemort's power even more weight. He doesn't just scare his enemies, he haunts those who have never even met him. He terrifies creatures who serve him indirectly. His evil is not just personal, it's systemic. It's the kind that embeds itself in magical lore, in old families like the Malfoys, in traditions that say some beings are born to serve. Voldemort didn't invent cruelty, he just made it more efficient. For House-Elves, he is not new. He is the ultimate master, the one who never sees them, the one who never cares. That is why the taboo is such a brilliant magical idea. It makes speech itself dangerous, it turns language into a trap, and it divides the world between those who speak and those who don't, not just out of fear, but out of wiring. Wizards can choose to say or not say the name. House-Elves don't have that choice. Their fear isn't rhetorical, it's physical. And it's not just about Voldemort, it's about every dark wizard who ever threatened to burn them alive for speaking out of turn. In that way, Dobby's trembling becomes a kind of monument. He is a creature born to serve, taught to obey, trained to fear, and yet he finds a way to rebel, not through speeches, not through grand defiance, but through loyalty, through love. His refusal to say Voldemort never changes, but his refusal to let fear control his actions. That's what makes him different. That's what makes him remarkable. He saves Harry, not because he is fearless, but because he is scared and goes anyway. The tragedy is that the films flatten all of this. They reduce Dobby's role to a few quirky appearances. They do not show the trembling, the hesitation, the quiet terror in the mention of the Dark Lord's name. They do not explain the taboo. And so, viewers never understand just how heavy Voldemort's presence is. They never see how fear shapes every interaction, how magical creatures carry that fear in their very speech. They miss the point that Voldemort's tyranny isn't just about killing, it's about silencing. When Ron stops saying the name, it's not a minor moment. It's a sign that the fear has reached even the strongest hearts. Hermione begins avoiding it earlier. She flinches every time. Even Lupin warns Harry, it's not just a name anymore, but Harry doesn't stop. And that makes him vulnerable. The taboo catches him because he is too brave or too stubborn. The magic punishes resistance, and yet that same punishment cannot touch those who are too terrified to speak. The irony is brutal. Perhaps that's why Dobby's death feels so final. He is the last to save Harry before the true darkness begins. He is the last to act freely before the war takes over everything. His death is not just the loss of a friend, and it is the loss of a voice that once trembled but still spoke through deeds. And that's what the films forgot. They forgot that fear is a character too, that trembling matters, that silence has reasons, and that sometimes the ones who speak the least have suffered the most. Number 22. Dobby and the Mirror of Erased. In the shadowed corners of Hogwarts, behind secret doors and enchanted walls, magic lingered not only in grand battles and heroic destinies, but in the quiet moments of overlooked characters. Among them stood a creature often dismissed, often underestimated, a house-elf named Dobby. His story, so tender and tragically profound, was not only a symbol of freedom, but a mirror to the human soul. And yet one magical artifact, capable of revealing the deepest longing of any heart, was never shown to him in the books or films. The Mirror of Erised, introduced in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, offered young Harry a glimpse of his family. But what would Dobby have seen had he stood before it, small hands pressed against its frame? Fan theorists, readers who saw beyond the spectacle and into the subtle poetry of J.K. Rowling's prose, offered a powerful answer. They imagined Dobby not in riches or grandeur, not commanding legions or clutching treasures, but smiling, simply smiling, a sock on every limb, a patchwork outfit that screamed liberation, and around him a circle of true friends, not masters, not owners, but but equals. To imagine Dobby before the mirror is to understand the purity of his heart. Unlike so many others, he had no ambition beyond the need to be free, to be valued, to be loved without condition. The films chose not to explore this possibility. Though Dobby's sacrifice in The Deathly Hallows was given a brief and emotional tribute, the complexity of his emotional world was largely erased. In the books, Rowling painted him not as comic relief, but as a soul of striking depth. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Hermione began her SPEW campaign to liberate House-Elves, Dobby stood apart. He already was free. "Dobby is a free elf," he declared proudly, but freedom alone did not define him. He had chosen to work at Hogwarts, and when asked why, he responded with quiet dignity, "Dobby likes work, but he wants paying now." This moment, easily lost in the larger narrative, revealed a crucial truth. Dobby did not desire idleness, he craved meaning. One might think of the mirror of Erised again. "Erised stra ehru, oit obe kafru oit onwossi," reads the engraving. It reflects not the face but the heart. Harry saw his parents. Ron saw himself as head boy holding the Quidditch cup. Albus Dumbledore, ever mysterious, once claimed he saw a pair of thick woolen socks, though even he admitted this was a lie. The mirror did not bend reality, it exposed it. And Dobby, who had lived under the cruel tyranny of the Malfoys, would likely have seen a world without shackles. But more than that, he might have seen a world where he was embraced, not feared, not pitied, but seen for who he truly was. There's a poignancy to this speculation, made even more tragic by its absence in the films. Dobby's deepest desire was not for himself alone, it was collective, a better life for all House-Elves. He took socks from Harry not as gifts alone, but as sacred symbols of rebellion. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry tricks Lucius Malfoy into freeing Dobby with a sock hidden in Tom Riddle's diary, the elf trembles. "Master has given Dobby a sock," he whispers, voice breaking. The power in that moment is not magical, it's human. A sock became a key, not just to freedom, but to identity. It wasn't wealth, it was dignity. The Mirror of Erised never appears again after the first book, though its echoes ripple throughout the series. Its silent wisdom, the idea that our deepest desires define us more than our actions, remains. In that framework, Dobby's life becomes a study in contrast to the many characters driven by power or vengeance. Voldemort, whose reflection would have been one of eternal domination. Draco Malfoy, who likely desired his father's approval. Even Snape, whose longing was bound in a single name, Lily. But Dobby? Dobby's soul shone differently. He had no great plan, only love. A lesser-known detail in the fandom only deepens this theory. In early drafts and behind-the-scenes material, it was rumoured that Rowling considered showing what Dobby might have seen in the mirror, but ultimately left it to interpretation. In doing so, she handed the question to readers. What does it mean to be fulfilled? The answer, through Dobby, might be socks, it might be friendship, it might be a dinner table with Hermione offering him tea, or a place at the Gryffindor table, no longer a servant, but a guest. Fan artists embraced this idea with fervour. Paintings, sketches and animations of Dobby before the Mirror of Erised began to appear online. In them he is often depicted standing small but proud, surrounded by happy elves, or even Harry and Hermione smiling at him like family. Some drawings show him dancing with socks on each finger and toe, eyes wide and joyous, reflecting not only his hopes, but the dreams of those who drew him. These interpretations say more than words. They mourn what was missing and celebrate what could have been. In the great halls of Hogwarts, history tends to focus on the chosen ones, the boys who lived, the lords who must not be named. But beneath the grandeur lies the quiet rebellion of beings like Dobby. He stood up to Lucius Malfoy. He protected Harry in the only way he knew how, even if it meant self-harm. He followed no prophecy. He bore no wand. and yet his courage echoed louder than many wizards. When he died, struck by Bellatrix's knife during the rescue at Malfoy Manor, Harry dug his grave by hand. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. A line simple as scripture, etched in stone and memory. In that moment, Harry honoured more than a friend. He honoured an idea. Dobby represented the untold, the neglected, those who toil in silence and dream not of riches but of peace. The mirror never reflected Dobby's heart, but his actions did. He risked everything for others. He found joy in the smallest kindnesses, and perhaps that's what he would have seen. A mirror filled with laughter, with socks and sunshine, a table full of friends, and a place where his name was spoken not in commands, but in affection. Even Kreacher, another house-elf, reveals in the Deathly Hallows how misunderstood their kind truly are. His loyalty, twisted and bitter, was born of neglect. But given kindness, even he began to change. It's in this transformation, this capacity for love, in beings long treated as tools, that the series reveals its moral core. Dobby led that charge, not with a sword, but with a smile. His deepest desire was never revenge, only warmth. If the mirror of Erised had stood in the kitchens of Hogwarts, reflecting not gold or glory, but the simplicity of companionship, Dobby might have stood there long, unmoving, not because he was entranced, but because he saw himself whole, no chains, no masters, just being. Rowling's world is filled with the spectacular, dragons, curses, phoenixes, but in Dobby it found something rarer, innocence. And it's this innocence, denied a reflection but not a legacy, that makes him unforgettable. Where others in the series changed by conquering darkness, Dobby transformed by embracing light. He did not need to fight Voldemort to be heroic. His defiance, his kindness, his longing for belonging, all spoke louder than spells. The omission of his potential mirror of erased moment is more than a gap in the story. It is a missed chance to deepen our understanding of the series' most selfless character. But perhaps in its absence, readers filled it with more meaning than the books ever could. The films, efficient in pacing but lean on subtlety, did not show Dobby's world as the books had done. They introduced him, they bid him farewell, but they did not linger. They did not show him sewing socks for his friends. They did not show the other elves whispering in admiration. They did not explore what freedom meant to someone born into servitude. That's why the imagined scene with the mirror holds such weight. It is a fan-built sanctuary for a character who deserved more. To envision Dobby before the mirror of Erised is to envision a story where love triumphs not in epic duels, but in silent dreams. His reflection would not have been fantastical. It would have been familiar, a room with friends, a life with purpose, and socks, always socks worn like medals of honor. The mirror may never have shown Dobby's heart on the page, but those who read between the lines saw it clearly. He was already living his dream, and in that perhaps lies the real magic. Number 23, the loss no one noticed. The waves crashed gently against the shore, but there was no peace in Harry's heart. He sat beside the grave, tracing the letters carved into the stone with his fingers. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. The words seemed too small for the loss he felt, too quiet for the bravery that had been shown. The night he died, Dobby had saved them all. Yet as time moved forward, the world moved with it, and no bells tolled for the little elf who had dared to stand up to the cruelest forces of darkness. No memorial was built in his honor, no portrait hung in Hogwarts. Even within the pages of history, he remained a footnote. It was a silence louder than screams. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had understood. In the moment of his death, they had been stripped of every illusion. The war wasn't just about powerful wizards and grand spells. It was about choices, loyalty, and sacrifice. Dobby had chosen them, not because he was ordered to, but because he believed in something greater than his own safety. And yet, outside that quiet circle of grief, the wizarding world remained indifferent. There were no tributes from the Ministry, no moments of silence in the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall didn't mention him. Kingsley Shacklebolt, newly rising as a force of resistance, never spoke his name. The Order of the Phoenix, weary and broken, turned to their tasks with no mention of the elf who had helped them escape from Malfoy Manor. That absence was more than neglect. It was a reflection of deep-rooted truths. For all the speeches about equality and justice, for all the changes that Harry hoped to see in the world he had nearly died for, Dobby's death revealed how far they had yet to go. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry reflects quietly, "Dobby, he was never free in the way people think, but he chose, and he died for it." It was one of the rare acknowledgments in the book of the complex humanity, hidden in those deemed less than human. It wasn't just a death, it was a test, and the world had failed it. The films gave us a glimpse. Dobby's final scene was touching, his arms wrapped around Harry, his eyes wide with pain but filled with peace. It was emotional, but brief. After the burial, the story shifted forward. There was no time to linger. The gravity of the moment was brushed aside in the rush to the next plot point. What they left out was the weight of the silence that followed. The long moment in the book when no one speaks, the waves crashing in the distance, and Harry digging the grave by hand, not by magic, not out of necessity, but respect. That scene was never given the space it deserved on screen. The film captured the sadness, but not the injustice. In the books, J.K. Rowling lingers on the details, the way Dobby refuses payment except for 1 galleon a week and 1 day off per month, even when offered more. The way he decorates the room of requirement with mismatched clothes, proudly showcasing his identity. The way he defies Malfoy not once, but repeatedly, even when it means pain. These are the quiet revolutions that make Dobby more than comic relief. He is the embodiment of resistance, yet he is never granted the status of a hero. When Sirius Black dies, the Order mourns. When Mad Eye falls, people weep. When Dobby dies, only 3 people dig the grave. There is a moment in the Deathly Hallows that many overlook. After Dobby's death, Harry gains a clarity that changes everything. He realizes that Voldemort's path, obsession with power, domination, and blood purity, is not just about spells and relics. It's about the willingness to see others as less, and the only answer to that darkness is to fight for those who are unseen. In that moment, Harry stops looking for Horcruxes and starts understanding people. The shift is subtle but real. Dobby's death is the final lesson that love is not just a weapon, it's a responsibility. And yet the film, with all their grandeur, reduced Dobby to a side character. Gone were the scenes in the kitchens of Hogwarts where he offers Harry tea and tries to help Winky. Gone were the conversations where Dobby proudly wears his socks. Gone was the quiet dignity in his voice when he tells Bellatrix Lestrange, "You shall not harm Harry Potter," with no fear, only certainty. These were not just cut for time. They were cut because the world does not yet know how to honor small heroes, the ones who die quietly without applause. Even among readers, Dobby is often remembered as that funny elf with the socks, but he was more than that. He was the first character in the entire series to openly defy the idea that House-Elves are property. Before Hermione launched SPEW, before Kreacher's transformation, before the Ministry even considered elf rights, Dobby was living proof that freedom was possible and dangerous. His existence was uncomfortable. He challenged the very structure of wizarding society. No wonder most chose to forget him. It is telling that when Harry buries Dobby, he does so without magic. The boy who could summon fire, deflect curses, and fly on a broom chooses instead to kneel in the dirt and dig with his hands. That moment is one of the few in the series where the magic is deliberately silenced, not because it fails, but because it would be wrong. Harry understands that to honour Dobby is not to conjure marble statues or send up sparks. It is to work, to labour, to give time and sweat and grief. The films skipped that part. They gave us tears but not soil under fingernails. The world within the story moved on, and so did the readers, but something precious was lost in that collective amnesia. The loss of Dobby was the loss of what he represented, a challenge to hierarchy, a voice for the voiceless. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and names, Dobby stood as a reminder that courage often comes from the least expected corners. He was not noble by birth, but by choice. He had no wand, no power, no family name, and still he saved them all. Even Kreacher, who once spat at the sight of mudbloods and muggleborns, is given more space to redeem himself in the films. His tale is complex, tragic, and rich, and rightly so, but Dobby, whose journey was no less heroic, is not allowed that same arc. He is remembered as a quirky sidekick, not a martyr. That is the tragedy, not just that he died, but that he was forgotten too quickly. The Ministry, so quick to decorate their war heroes, never considered honouring the elf who broke every chain placed on him. The statue erected after the Battle of Hogwarts included witches, wizards, centaurs and goblins. But no elves. Not even in stone was Dobby allowed to stand among them. And perhaps that's the point. The system he defied never wanted him to be remembered, because to remember. Dobby is to remember that the world is built on inequality, that real bravery does not wear robes or titles. It comes barefoot with a pillowcase for clothing and a heart stronger than steel. In the end, it was not Voldemort who silenced Dobby's legacy. It was the indifference of the world he saved. The same indifference that enslaved his kind for generations. The same indifference that saw his death as necessary but not tragic. The same indifference that still echoes in real life, in how we value those who serve quietly, sacrifice deeply, and ask for nothing in return. Dobby was not just a character, he was a mirror, and many didn't like what they saw in it. Rowling once said that Dobby's death was one of the hardest to write. Not because it was sad, but because it was unfair. She knew that in a better world, someone like Dobby would not have had to die alone. But heroes like him rarely get the endings they deserve. They die so that others may live and are remembered only by those who truly saw them. For Harry, Ron and Hermione, Dobby was a friend. For the world, he was a servant. That is the loss we never truly acknowledged. The films gave us flashes, but not depth. The books offered us silence, and that silence was deafening. Not because nothing was said, but because the world said nothing. Dobby's grave remains by the sea, unmarked by history, untouched by ceremony. And yet perhaps that is fitting for a creature who gave everything and asked for nothing. A quiet place by the waves may be the truest honour. But we, the readers, must remember, because if we forget Dobby, we forget the heart of the story. Not magic, not prophecy, but love, even when no one is watching. Number 24, House-Elves and Hogwarts Secret Passages. It was a well-guarded truth, hidden in the folds of stone and shadow, that no creature in Hogwarts knew the castle more intimately than the House-Elves. While the portraits whispered secrets and the ghosts drifted through memories, it was the House-Elves who moved silently behind the veil of daily life, slipping through doorways that didn't exist to the eyes of students, climbing staircases that never revealed themselves to the uninvited, and navigating with uncanny precision a castle that seemed to rearrange itself on a whim. Among them, one elf stood out more than the others, not because he sought attention, but because he dared to act. Dobby, once enslaved, now free, carried in his mind a map more detailed than any marauder's parchment, a mental blueprint of Hogwarts and its secrets that no professor could rival. Dobby's intimate knowledge of the castle revealed itself subtly in Order of the Phoenix, when he began aiding Harry Potter during one of the school's darkest eras. Dolores Umbridge, with her oppressive regime, restricted student movement, and turned Hogwarts into a prison disguised as an institution. Students found themselves watched, policed, and punished for every minor transgression. But somehow, miraculously, Harry, Ron, and Hermione managed to continue their work with Dumbledore's army, finding ways to evade surveillance and reach the Room of Requirement, an ever-changing sanctuary that only appeared to those in desperate need. The question that few asked, and that the films failed to even whisper, was, how did they get there, untracked and unseen? The answer lay not in magical cloaks or clever tricks, but in Dobby's whispered knowledge. "There are 7 secret passageways out of Hogwarts, Harry Potter," he had said once, a line quickly glossed over in the books but heavy with implication. That statement did not just mean exits to the outside world. It meant corridors behind stone fireplaces, stairwells within walls, and gaps between the centuries that only House-Elves dared to use. These weren't plotted on Filch's records, nor did even the Marauders' map show all of them. What Dobby offered Harry was more than information. It was access to an underground, ancient network of mobility. Forged through years of servitude, necessity, and magic unknown to wizard kind, it is easy to forget, watching the cinematic adaptation, that the Room of Requirement wasn't discovered by accident. In Order of the Phoenix, Dobby is the one who reveals its existence to Harry, describing it with peculiar accuracy, explaining how it manifests based on the needs of the seeker. Sometimes it is there and sometimes it is not, he says, but when it appears, it is always equipped for the seeker's needs. This one scene alone exposes how deeply the House-Elves understand the living, breathing spirit of Hogwarts. They do not just inhabit its halls, they are part of its magic. And Dobby, more than anyone else, knew how to bend that magic to serve a cause greater than housework. In the films, Dobby's appearances seem almost whimsical, arriving and vanishing without cause as though carried by winds of fate. But in the books, his entrances are precise, tactical, and rooted in his command of Hogwarts geography. When he alerts Harry to Umbridge's approach or appears with unexpected gifts like gillyweed, he is not acting on impulse. He is navigating secret routes that allow him to dodge walls, prefects, and magical alarms alike. This is not accidental, it is mastery. And the fact that this element was left out of the films robbed Dobby of one of his greatest strengths, not loyalty, not magic, but insight into the fortress that was Hogwarts. What makes this knowledge even more powerful is its exclusivity. Professors may teach magic, and ghosts may tell stories, but even Albus Dumbledore himself is not shown to possess the same granular understanding of the castle's architecture. In fact, Dumbledore often relied on the House-Elves more than anyone realized. The kitchens, hidden behind a portrait of a fruit bowl, were their dominion. Yet beyond feeding the school, the elves maintained the less visible threads of its magic. Dobby didn't simply know where a room was, he knew how it changed, when it moved, and how to summon it. One often overlooked moment that illustrates this is during the preparation for the Yule Ball in Goblet of Fire. While students scrambled with dresses and partners, the House-Elves quietly transformed the Great Hall, adjusted passages for guests, and coordinated logistics in a way that suggested far more than mere labor. They anticipated magical anomalies, shifted walls, and stabilized structures with the ease of artisans. Yet they remained invisible in the narrative, operating behind the curtains, shaping Hogwarts without recognition. These were not mere servants, they were stewards of the school's very soul. There is another detail buried in Half-Blood Prince that reinforces this idea. When Harry attempts to follow Draco Malfoy on the Marauders' map, he finds that Draco sometimes disappears, vanishing from even this enchanted document. Later, it is revealed that Malfoy is using the Room of Requirement. But how did he learn of it? And why did it only appear to him when he needed it most? It is reasonable to wonder whether Draco too was guided, perhaps not by Dobby, but by another elf. The presence of House-Elves in Slytherin households is well known, and one can only speculate how often students have benefited from their unseen wisdom. One could also argue that Kreacher, the bitter and secretive elf of Grimmauld Place, shared a similar command of magical architecture. In Deathly Hallows, he uses secret passageways and advanced magic to assist Harry and the others, showing that this knowledge isn't unique to Dobby. It is a trait woven into the very identity of House-Elves. Their servitude demanded stealth, their work required precision, and their survival depended on understanding the spaces where no one else dared to look. Hogwarts, with its thousands of rooms and unpredictable magic, became their playground and their stronghold. Even the Room of Hidden Things, revealed in Deathly Hallows as the ancient vault where generations of students had stashed forbidden objects, was part of the hidden Hogwarts only elves truly understood. It is here that Voldemort hid one of his Horcruxes. But what strikes the reader is that Dobby was able to guide Harry there without hesitation. He didn't just know of the room, he understood how to navigate a path others couldn't follow. That ability came not from books or spells, but from years of silent observation and magical symbiosis with the castle itself. The greatest tragedy in omitting this aspect of house-elf knowledge from the films is not just that it lessens Dobby's role, it diminishes the mystery of Hogwarts. The castle is more than walls and staircases. It is alive, breathing with enchantments and ancient rules, many of which have long since been forgotten. But the house-elves remembered. They walked the same paths for centuries, saw changes others didn't notice, and adapted without fanfare. In that sense, they were the castle's memory, its pulse, and perhaps even its guardians. The quote from Order of the Phoenix, "Dobby knows the place, sir. Dobby heard tell of it from the other house-elves when he came to Hogwarts, sir," might seem simple, but it reveals that this knowledge is communal. It is passed from elf to elf like sacred scripture, a hidden lore of corridors and rooms that no human teacher ever wrote down. Dobby did not discover these things alone. He was inducted into a lineage of knowledge, a society within a society, one that watched Hogwarts from within its bones. It is worth noting that Dobby's final act of heroism, rescuing the captives from Malfoy Manor, was not just about bravery, it was about logistics. He knew how to apparate into a house protected by dark enchantments, something even experienced wizards hesitated to attempt. That feat was not spontaneous. It was a culmination of everything he had learned as a house elf: stealth, precision, timing, and the ability to slip through magical defenses like smoke through cracks in a wall. Had the films shown even a glimpse of this hidden mastery, Dobby's legacy would be different. He would not be remembered only for his socks, his squeaky voice, or his tragic death, but also for his brilliancy. He was not simply a loyal friend, he was a keeper of the castle's soul. In ignoring the relationship between house-elves and the living magic of Hogwarts, the films lost a layer of depth that could have changed how audiences viewed not only Dobby, but the entire unseen world that made Hogwarts more than just a school. And perhaps when students walked its halls after the Battle of Hogwarts, they never realized that much of their safety, their victories, and their hope had been quietly stitched into the stones by those who cleaned the floors and served their meals. The castle never spoke of it, but if its walls could talk, they would speak not of battles and banners, but of small hands, quiet footsteps, and a knowledge so profound it was practically sacred. Number 25. Hermione and the Sock Rebellion. It began with a pile of knitted hats. In the heart of Gryffindor Tower, among the roaring fireplace and mismatched armchairs of the common room, Hermione Granger quietly orchestrated one of the strangest rebellions Hogwarts had ever known. It was not a rebellion of wands or hexes, but of socks and scarves. During her 4th year at Hogwarts, Hermione founded an organization she called the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW for short, a movement that almost everyone around her dismissed as absurd. But Hermione, with her relentless moral compass and stubborn heart, believed she had uncovered an injustice too long ignored, and in her eyes it wasn't just a cause, it was a war of liberation. Her campaign quickly turned from theoretical arguments about elfish rights to practical, if peculiar, action. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she began leaving articles of clothing, bright woolen hats, colourful socks, even hand-knitted mittens, tucked among the chairs and scattered across the floor of the Gryffindor common room. The idea to her was simple and inspired. House-Elves, bound by ancient magical law, could only be freed when they were presented with clothing. By planting garments where the elves would inevitably find them while cleaning, Hermione hoped to trick them into accidental freedom. She imagined they would rejoice, thank her, and walk into the sunrise of their newfound liberty. But the results of her quiet rebellion were anything but celebratory. The House-Elves did not consider themselves captives. To them, the discovery of discarded clothing was not an invitation to freedom, it was a direct insult. In the same book, it is noted that the House-Elves were so offended by Hermione's actions that they refused to enter the Gryffindor Tower entirely. They stopped cleaning it altogether, leaving the place to accumulate dust and crumbs. As the narrator noted, Hermione's woolly hats and socks kept disappearing, but the common room remained uncleaned. This seemingly comic subplot revealed a deeply philosophical dilemma. Hermione, driven by empathy and logic, could not understand how someone might choose servitude. Her perspective, shaped by Muggle values and her own moral code, told her that no creature should be enslaved. But the House-Elves, raised in a world where devotion was their identity, did not see their condition as one of suffering. In fact, they were proud of their work, found meaning in obedience, and viewed freedom not as salvation but as abandonment. The moment they suspected Hermione's knitted items were traps, they responded with rejection and silence, all but one. Dobby, the eccentric and famously liberated elf, embraced Hermione's campaign with unfiltered enthusiasm. Where other House-Elves saw insult, Dobby saw opportunity. He collected the clothes with glee, sometimes wearing multiple hats and pairs of socks at once. His loyalty to freedom was so complete that he treated each discarded item as a gift. As described in the Goblet of Fire, Dobby was delighted. He hoarded the hats and socks Hermione left, often wearing several at once. His fashion sense became a symbol of his liberation, a patchwork of mismatched garments proudly displayed on his tiny body. Yet even Dobby's actions drew the quiet ridicule of other elves. Winky, another elf introduced in the same book, reacted with horror at the idea of being free. Her dismissal from the Crouch family, paired with her unwilling independence, left her in a spiral of guilt and despair. She drank butterbeer obsessively and wept over her lost status. Dobby's joy stood in stark contrast to Winky's devastation, underlining the complex psychology of these magical beings. Not every creature, even when technically freed, feels saved. The films, in their effort to streamline the plot, erased this entire storyline. SPEW was never mentioned, and the subplot with the clothing disappeared entirely. Gone were Hermione's knitted hats, her fiery debates, and her quiet frustration at the indifference of her peers. The cinematic version of the story chose to focus on larger arcs, Triwizard tournaments, Voldemort's return, the death of Cedric Diggory. But in doing so, it lost one of the richest philosophical threads of the fourth book, the tension between freedom and choice, and the uncomfortable truth that liberation, when imposed, can feel like violence. What makes Hermione's campaign so fascinating is not just its comedic failure, but what it reveals about her character. She is brilliant, but she can be blind. Her heart is huge, but sometimes her strategies are naive. Her insistence on freeing the House-Elves mirrors real-world debates about cultural imposition and misguided charity. Hermione never asks the elves what they want. She assumes, like many well-intentioned reformers, that she knows what is best. When her gifts are rejected, she is stunned. But the elves' reaction is not about gratitude, it's about identity. They do not see themselves as shackled. To take the clothes would be to betray their purpose. This quiet tension builds throughout the book, and it leaves a lingering question: who gets to define freedom? For Dobby, liberation is a gift he had to fight for, and he wears it with pride. For Winky, it is a punishment worse than chains. And for the other elves, it is simply unthinkable. Hermione, in trying to save them, forces them into a confrontation they never wanted. And perhaps that's why the elves stop coming. Perhaps they do not want to be changed by someone who refuses to see them as they see themselves. The brilliance of this scene lies in its subtlety. It is both hilarious and tragic. The image of Dobby shuffling through the castle halls, draped in 6 hats and 3 scarves, is absurd. But beneath that comedy is a deep melancholy. He is the only one who understands what Hermione is trying to do, and in his own way he is trying to help. But he is also alone. The other elves mock him, Winky mourns her past, and Hermione continues knitting, unaware that her gifts are received only by the one elf who was already free. The rebellion Hermione leads is not one of fire and fury. It is quiet, awkward, and lonely. Her friends offer lukewarm support at best. Ron dismisses SPEW as a joke, and even Harry finds it hard to care. The rest of the student body ignores it entirely, but Hermione continues, not because of popularity, but because of principle. This determination, even in the face of failure, is what makes her noble. But her failure also reveals a truth about activism. It is not enough to want change. You must understand those you seek to help. In skipping this subplot, the films lost an important layer of Hermione's development. She was never just the clever girl with a wand. She was a fighter for justice, even when no one was watching. And in this case, she fought for a group that didn't want her help. It is a painful, ironic twist, and one that makes her all the more human. Her mistake was real, but so was her compassion. The scene with the House-Elves and the rag rebellion of socks and scarves is one of those rare literary moments where comedy, tragedy, and philosophy meet. It asks difficult questions without preaching, and it forces the reader to wrestle with uncomfortable ideas. Can you free someone who does not want to be freed? Should you try? What if your definition of dignity is not theirs? Hermione's hats never freed anyone but Dobby, but in doing so they illuminated the invisible chains people accept and the invisible damage good intentions can cause. The magic of that subplot was not in the freedom it gave, but in the questions it raised, and in that way it remains one of the most powerful omissions from the films. Number 26. Kreacher and the locket on the wall. In the shadowed gloom of number 12, Grimmauld Place, there hung a small object above the mantelpiece, a tarnished locket, no larger than a child's palm, swinging ever so slightly on its hook. Visitors often overlooked it, dismissing it as just another relic in a house overflowing with strange heirlooms, but J.K. Rowling planted it there deliberately, like a ticking time bomb. This unassuming locket was no ordinary trinket. It was a Horcrux, one of Lord Voldemort's cruelest creations, infused with a fragment of his twisted soul. And standing just a few steps away from it for days, weeks, maybe even months, was someone who knew exactly what it was: the house-elf Kreacher. Kreacher, the bitter and snarling servant of the Black family, had always been treated with contempt by the wizards around him. Even Sirius, whom readers sympathize with, showed little kindness to the Kreacher. Harry himself only began to change his view of Kreacher much later, and too late to prevent the consequences of his early indifference. The films stripped Kreacher down to a plot device, missing the tragedy that surrounded him. In the books, however, Kreacher is not just a resentful creature. Mumbling to himself, he is a keeper of secrets, a witness to a legacy of cruelty, and, crucially, a silent guardian of a hidden war. The moment that went unnoticed by many and omitted entirely by the films is when Harry realizes that the Horcrux, the one they've been hunting for so long, was once within their grasp. "A locket no one could open," Kreacher says reluctantly under Harry's pressure. He had seen it with his own eyes. He had seen Regulus Black, Sirius's younger brother, bring it into the house. And he had seen it stolen by Mundungus Fletcher, a petty thief and Order member who made off with the treasure while the Order was busy using the Black residence as their base. Kreacher's silence is haunting. He did not tell anyone the locket was missing. He did not alert the Order. He did not warn Harry or Hermione or Ron, even as they searched for the Horcruxes. And his reason for silence is quietly devastating. No one asked. Wizards spoke over him, dismissed him, treated him as a nuisance. To them, Kreacher was not a person. He was a servant, a leftover from a pure blood past, barely worth their attention. But he saw everything. He saw Mundungus stuffing his cloak with trinkets. He saw the locket disappear. And he said nothing. This omission in the films dilutes one of the most potent commentaries in the book, the entrenched disregard the wizarding world holds for house-elves. Kreacher's silence becomes a metaphor. It is not just about a missed clue, it is about how the wizarding elite, even those in the Order of the Phoenix, failed to recognize the sentience and loyalty of those who served them. Kreacher might have prevented months of suffering had he been seen, heard, valued, but no one listened until the damage was already done. It was Hermione, of course, who always saw it. From her earliest appearances, she fought for House-Elves' rights, founding SPEW, and enduring mockery from Ron and indifference from Harry. Her efforts seemed laughable to the others, a distraction from the greater battle. But this episode with Kreacher proves she was right. Dobby and Kreacher are not comic relief. They are casualties of systemic injustice, and when finally treated with respect, they offer more than loyalty. They become heroes. The moment when Harry decides to treat Kreacher kindly is transformative. He gives Kreacher the fake locket, a small gesture, but one loaded with meaning. It meant a great deal to him, being given the locket, being spoken to kindly, the narration tells us. That moment shifts the house-elf's entire demeanor. He becomes sharper, more obedient, even affectionate. It is not magic that transforms Kreacher. It is simple decency. The films gloss over this transformation, but in the book, it stands as one of the most human acts in a world filled with spells. Regulus Black, too, is part of this tapestry. A character readers never meet alive, yet his shadow looms large. He was the one who saw the evil in Voldemort's methods and tried to stop him. He ordered Kreacher to help him retrieve the Horcrux from the cave, the same cave where Dumbledore would later nearly perish. Kreacher, by Regulus's command, was forced to drink the potion guarding the Horcrux, and then told to return home and destroy the locket. But he failed. He could not destroy it, and when Regulus tried to do it himself, he died. And Kreacher returned, alone, holding the cursed locket and the weight of a master's sacrifice. In that memory, Kreacher reveals the depth of his pain. Master Regulus drank all the potion, and he told Kreacher to go. And he said he had to be destroyed. There is sorrow in Kreacher's voice, more profound than most ever imagined he could feel. He tried to obey, he tried to destroy the locket. He punished himself when he failed, and all the while the Order laughed at him, scorned him, left him alone in a house full of ghosts and dust. Kreacher lived with the memory of Regulus's death and the shame of his failure every single day. And then came Mundungus Fletcher, that slippery, careless man who betrayed the Order's cause for a few galleons. He stole from the house. Kreacher saw it, and again said nothing. Why would he speak? The last time he spoke truth, it killed Regulus. The last time he served loyally, he was left to suffer. He had no reason to trust any wizard, but the locket, that Horcrux, went from Fletcher to the hands of Dolores Umbridge. Another tragedy born of silence and indifference. The locket poisoned those who wore it. Ron nearly left Harry and Hermione under its influence. It whispered doubts, brewed resentment, heightened fears. All of it could have been avoided had anyone, taken the time to listen to Kreacher, but they didn't. And so the war raged on. Harry's long hunt for the Horcruxes was prolonged by this simple truth: the wizarding world does not value the voices of the ones it enslaves. The image of the locket hanging over the Black family fireplace becomes symbolic. It is not merely a cursed object. It is a representation of generational rot, of pride, of ignorance. It dangled in plain sight while brilliant minds searched in dark corners. It swung above the mantle while the war brewed in every corner of Britain. And all the while, Kreacher dusted around it, never daring to speak, because he knew no one would listen. There is a kind of poetic justice in the fact that when Harry finally shows Kreacher kindness, the elf responds with devotion. He rallies the Hogwarts House-Elves to fight against Voldemort. He leads a charge with frying pans and knives. The one dismissed as worthless becomes a warrior. The elf, treated like furniture, becomes a general. And yet the films reduce him to a footnote. They never show the locket above the fireplace. They never give Kreacher his redemption. They never let him mourn Regulus or rage at Fletcher or fight for Hogwarts. And in doing so, they miss one of the story's deepest veins. Kreacher's arc is not just about servitude, it is about memory, grief, and unacknowledged dignity. He is a relic of a decaying ideology, yes, but he is also a soul capable of growth, capable of loyalty that puts wizards to shame. His knowledge could have saved time, his pain could have warned others, but it was buried beneath centuries of magical arrogance. Wizards like Dumbledore fought Voldemort while ignoring the whispers of the House-Elves under their roofs. This forgotten scene, this ignored truth, that Kreacher knew that he watched the Horcrux be stolen, that he remained silent because no one cared. It is a microcosm of the wizarding world's biggest blind spot. And the consequences of that blindness cost lives, time, and nearly the war itself. Only when the oppressed are finally seen, heard, and honored does the balance shift. Only then does the house elf rise. Number 27. Why House-Elves don't rebel. The House-Elves of the Harry Potter universe remain among the most misunderstood creatures in J.K. Rowling's world, and nowhere is that more evident than in the film adaptations, which reduce their presence and omit the intricate reality of their servitude. Nowhere is this more glaring than in the final chapters of the saga, where the House-Elves of Hogwarts, armed and ready, emerge to defend the school against Voldemort's army. This critical moment is entirely absent from the films, which deprives the audience of a powerful statement on loyalty, courage, and self-emancipation. While the cinematic version focuses solely on wizards and witches, the books show that the war against darkness was fought by everyone, including the smallest and most oppressed. This narrative exclusion has led many fans to ask a deceptively simple question. If House-Elves possess such potent magical abilities, often more efficient and less restricted than wizard magic, why do they not rebel? The answer lies buried in the complex magical and biological nature of their existence, a blend of deep-rooted enchantment and conditioned instinct that binds them to servitude in ways most wizards fail to question. Dobby, the free elf, is an exception, and his rare defiance provides a glimpse into the deep psychological chains that house-elves are born with. The key to understanding their submission is found not in weakness, but in an ancient, magical structure. In the Goblet of Fire, Dobby explains the pain that comes with disobedience. Dobby had to punish himself, sir, he says, after attempting to warn Harry about the dangers at Hogwarts. This is not simple guilt, it is magical enforcement embedded in their very essence. When Dobby tries to act against the Malfoys, he doesn't just risk social punishment, he physically suffers. House-Elves are not merely loyal, they are magically and biologically compelled to be. In the Order of the Phoenix, Kreacher becomes another example of the painful duality that defines house-elf existence. Although he despises Sirius Black and clings to outdated pureblood ideologies, he still follows orders when given directly and precisely. But when loopholes exist, as they did when Sirius ambiguously commanded Kreacher to get out, the elf found ways to betray him without technically breaking his command. This shows that House-Elves are bound not just by magic, but by a logic of obedience that must be passed like legal language. The consequences are fatal. Sirius dies as a result of this misunderstanding, but no punishment befalls Kreacher because he never directly disobeyed. This legalistic nature of their magical bonds also explains why House-Elves rarely rebel. Their magic is not their own, it is tethered to their role. While a wizard wields magic as a tool of will, House-Elves have their abilities shaped and regulated by their servitude. When Dobby is freed by the symbolic gift of a sock in the Chamber of Secrets, his freedom is not just social or emotional, it is magical. Suddenly the power he already possessed becomes autonomous. That shift allows him to act independently, something no enslaved elf can do. Despite the intensity of their bonds, House-Elves are not mindless. The narrative shows that they are emotionally complex, capable of love, fear, resentment, and devotion. Winky, the female elf introduced in The Goblet of Fire, is a tragic representation of what happens when a house elf is freed without consent. Dismissed by Barty Crouch Sr., Winky becomes emotionally destroyed, descending into drunkenness and despair. "Winky is a good elf," she sobs repeatedly, mourning not just her loss of purpose, but her magical identity. Her self-worth is intertwined with servitude. To be freed without wanting it is, to her, a humiliation rather than liberation. This emotional complexity is precisely why Dobby's story is so powerful. He is not merely a brave character, he is a revolutionary in a world where his very nature fights against rebellion. His journey from abused servant to self-employed elf working at Hogwarts for wages is a subtle but radical narrative. Dobby becomes the first house elf to seek autonomy without losing his sense of purpose. "Dobby is a free elf," he says with pride, asserting both his independence and his dignity. His sacrifice in the Deathly Hallows, where he dies rescuing Harry and others from Malfoy Manor, is a culmination of his defiance against everything he was designed to be. Yet perhaps the most compelling instance of transformation is Kreacher's evolution in the Deathly Hallows. Once filled with hatred and distrust, he gradually changes under Harry's respectful treatment. When Harry addresses him with kindness and begins to treat him as a sentient being rather than property, Kreacher's loyalty shifts. He leads the charge of the House-Elves at the Battle of Hogwarts, brandishing a kitchen knife and shouting for Harry Potter. This moment, completely absent from the film, symbolizes what respect and recognition can unlock within a house elf's heart. The transformation is not magical in the spellcasting sense, it is human, ethical, and profound. J.K. Rowling subtly constructs a system in which house elves are not free to rebel because their condition is not entirely social, it is magical biology. The enslavement of elves is normalized not only by wizards, but also by the elves themselves, many of whom see it as their reason for being. This is not simply a case of brainwashing or social conditioning. It is a fundamental structure of their existence, written into their magic and their instinct. Freedom for them is more than a choice. It is a reprogramming of the soul.